I wish I had known how much of a game it is. VC is very much, I mean, I hate to put it this way, but it really is a game. You need to know the right people. Most VCs will only take an intro if it's warm, meaning that you've been introed for someone else. And I looked at it as, wow, I have this great product and all this great stuff. Like, why wouldn't anyone invest in me? But I was being ignorant to this. I'm black. So there's that aspect. I was being a little ignorant there. But the other side of it, too, is that investors are not the visionaries. Founders are. You can't expect them to understand what you're thinking or what you're talking about or what you're trying to do. You have to literally sell and lay it out for them.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Today, I interview Arjay Ruggles, who is a sex worker turned investor turned founder. This is a really inspiring and empowering interview, and I can't wait to dive in. My name is Martina, and I'm on a mission to increase representation of early stage investors by sharing what I learn and by interviewing investors who share their advice and founders who share their journey. Welcome, everyone. My name is Martina, and I am so excited to talk to you all about or with Arjay Ruggles. He is the founder, he's a community builder, he's a sex worker advocate. He founded Homeroom, which raised a pre-seed of over $750,000, which is really incredible. He worked as a community manager at LAAS, which is Lolita as a Service, who is a general partner and founder of Ghana's Ventures. And he was previously a makeup artist and a sex worker. Arjay, thank you so much for being on this channel. I'm so excited you're here.
Thank you so much. And that was like such a lovely introduction. I feel like everybody already knows me. It's great.
Well, you're so open about your experience, and I would love actually to just dive right in and just hear a bit about you, your journey. How did you end up where you are today?
Sounds great. Let's do it.
Yeah,
Girl, if that tells you anything, that's how I'm doing. I'm in fundraising mode, so my mind is gone. Didn't even recognize that you were asking the question. That's where I'm at.
Okay, so then actually, let me just check in. How are you doing?
I'm good. I decided in all my infinite wisdom to move the same month that I kicked off fundraising, which was a choice. So that will never be a choice I make again. But I'm doing okay. I have some really great people supporting me. All three of my partners are supporting me, and I have a really great network of founders who've been reaching out on their own, actually, to ask how I'm doing, which has been really lovely. So hang it in there.
I'm sorry I didn't start with that. I should have checked in first.
You're okay.
You're just in straight business.
No, you're totally fine. So repeat the question and we can do it.
Okay, great. So you've had a really fascinating journey. I would love for you to tell us a bit about that.
Yes, of course. So I really had a very non-traditional entry into tech. As you mentioned, I was a sex worker, a makeup artist. I've been working as a sex worker since my late teens. And just to be clear, like, don't pity me. That was a career by choice. I liked my job, and in fact, that's something I talk about frequently. Is that most sex workers do it by choice. It's not something they're forced into. But I liked my job. I worked most of my clients were primarily wealthy white men. So I got to see a lot of different things that probably people my age and in my tax bracket probably never would have seen. But in 2019, I decided to make a career change and started focusing more on makeup. I started exploring it as a way to like mess with my gender identity. Loved it. Found that I was actually pretty good at it. If you're able to paint, you can do makeup. It's very like similar. And so started like doing Instagram, started doing YouTube. I got a job at Mac and got presented with tons of opportunities. In early 2020, I was in the running for, I don't know if you know him, but there's a makeup artist on YouTube, James Charles. He was doing a reality TV show. And cool. They were narrowing it down to the final 7. I was number 8 that was cut. So even the opportunity was crazy, and they were thinking about using me for season 2. I got asked to work backstage at New York Fashion Week that fall. But then COVID. And so overnight, it just like, obviously that all washed away. And so I started my first startup, which was a DTC brand for sex workers and kinksters. Built everything myself, ran it entirely solo. Got to 53K in sales, which was crazy for a first year. I felt really amazing. I ended up hiring a virtual assistant who is now my executive assistant, and several sex workers from within the community to run it. Playtime, name of the company, Play TYME. It's still running, and we transitioned to being a community-led and community-operated media brand. So there's 2 podcasts, we have a newsletter, we have a mobile app for shopping. The team over there is just doing such incredible work. And so that was kind of like the foundation of like me really understanding community. So ended up getting a job with Lolita, helping her. ended up founding Homeroom, and insanity. Obviously, the fundraising environment was very different earlier this year than it is now, but we were able to close our pre-seed in 3 weeks, which for a Black founder is absolutely insane. I feel very thankful that I have some amazing people that backed us and believed in us, and since then, we've built an all-star team. The previous director of community for Huffington Post is our head of community, Dan McDonald. We have the co-founder of an incredible no-code studio, David Harper, helping us on engineering, and then Bunny Doss and PJ Zayak help us with ops and with HR people and culture. And so just really, really happy to have an amazing team behind me trying to build the company.
What an incredible journey. And yeah, I honestly feel so lucky that I found, like, your Twitter popped up, or your tweet popped up in my Twitter feed, and normally I complain. I'm like, oh, I don't follow these people. Like, why does this pop up? And you were one of them, and I was like, oh, sick. Like, what is the story? And then my partner called me out. He was like, don't you normally complain about these? And I was like, okay, the one time.
One time it works. Elon must have did something right for that day.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing your journey. And I would love to just kind of know, from your perspective, you seem to have, or you have a strong perspective on community. So what does that mean to you?
Yeah, so community to me is something, we talk about this obviously a lot at the company, is community really is being around the people who believe in you and your identity, whether that be individual. So like, for example, you being a woman who's incredibly talented, very charismatic, and, you know, working in a space where they don't really give people attention like you and I. A community would be individuals who believe in you and your mission, maybe those who believe in the type of content you put. For a brand, those are going to be the individuals who are dedicated to your brand's mission, your product, what you stand for, and who really identify with what you're trying to do. And that could be as little as like just being a fan of Pine Sol, all the way up to being a community member for a group of women and PLC founders, right? Like, it's a very wide spectrum. But they are not Twitter followers. A community is not your TikTok followers. These are not your newsletter subscribers, because those are people who come and go. They might be interested in you, but they're not dedicated to what you're about. Your community are going to be the people in your Discord server, in your text group, in your Telegram channel. These are going to be people who like have gone out of their way to be in a space where they could be connected to you or your business or your brand.
I saw like a link or like a tweet that you said where it's like community is not the same as audience.
Mm-hmm. Exactly that. A lot of people will conflate the two, where they'll be like, our community is 150,000 people, but then you look at it and it's like 125K of that are Twitter followers, and maybe the other 25K is the Discord server. And it's like, no, your community is 25,000 people. It's not 100. Yeah. It's not 150. So that's something we talk about extensively, and I think people are really starting to see that.
So tell me more about Homeroom. What inspired that?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I used to work for Lolita Taub, helping to manage her community. And for about 6 to 7 months, I was doing a lot. I was helping to manage her team. I was running her newsletter, managing her Twitter account content, a lot of it. And throughout that entire process, I learned so much. A lot of people don't realize this, but building a community is very similar to building a startup. There's an incredible community builder, Rosie Sherry, who coined the term MVC, so minimum viable community. And it's very similar to the way you think about a startup, where you want to put out something, just put out something that is a minimum version of what you're trying to achieve, and then iterate on top of that. And so that's what we did with Last and Lolita. We built a community. We started layering on events on top of there, then a community newsletter, and then various different aspects on top. And throughout that experience, I just got to see all of the pain points in trying to build a community, especially one for a business. And so September 2021, I incorporated Homeroom, and our initial mission was to make that process easier, to make it easier for businesses to build and scale communities. That's now grown, obviously. We now are on a mission to solve online content moderation. Specifically, we want to help fix the internet. But at the very base level, to get there, we have to start at the ground floor. And the ground floor is helping all businesses, all content creators, all DAOs, whatever that looks like, to have a shared sense of idea and identity and purpose when it comes to the way that they build, manage, and scale their communities.
That is such an incredible mission. I mean, we definitely see that. That's, obviously Twitter's struggle.
Woo, girl.
Content moderation. That's not even one of my questions, but I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts on that?
I want to stay cordial, so I'll put it this way. I think Elon Musk is a perfect example of what happens when a man-child is not told no. The fact that you know how to run the fact that you claim to know how to run a car company and a rocket space agency and all of these things does not mean that you know how to build nor manage one of the largest social media networks in the world. And we're seeing the fallout of that. And content moderation is one area where I'm very nervous about where we're going to see social media go in regards to that. Most platforms don't take it seriously because they don't have an incentive to, because their customers are not us. Their customers are advertisers. We are the product. So therefore, any money they spend on fixing the product, which is us, and aka content moderation, that cuts into their margin, that cuts into their revenue, that cuts into the profit that you're generating. So they don't have an incentive, so they're not going to take it seriously. And especially someone as egotistical and disgusting as Elon Musk, he's not going to take it seriously either. So it's very dangerous, the path that we're on, and my hope is that Homeroom can help to recorrect that.
And that was the cordial version, so I can't imagine what the cordial version sounds like.
If you ever want to hear my less cordial versions, you can check out TikTok. That's where all that stuff lies.
Okay, good to know. I hadn't looked you up on TikTok yet, so that's good. Okay, great. Well, okay, so then let's back up a little bit because Homeroom got started on Discord. And for people that aren't familiar with that, like, what is Discord? Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Discord is kind of like, I like to tell people, it's Slack on steroids. It really is in my opinion, one of the best platforms for personal communities. You have video, you have audio, you have text. They've now added forum channels, which is kind of ironic because their whole idea was we're not a forum, but now they've introduced that. And it really is a great way for you to bring together people around a single topic, a single brand, what have you. The best way I like to describe it in terms of the way it functions is like, you can build a website to shop on Squarespace, and you can also do it on Shopify. But they're going to have different ways that they achieve that, and obviously Squarespace is going to be a lot easier, while Shopify just throws the whole kitchen sink and everything at you and tells you to figure it out. Discord is definitely like Shopify. They throw everything at you, and it's up to you to figure it out. And so we decided to start there because it's the most complex one, and it deserves to be fixed. Over 140 million people use it every month. And so that's where we started. And so now that we're starting to figure that out, we're now going to start to branch out and support other community platforms as well.
That's super cool. Honestly, I hadn't heard of Discord until I heard about Homeroom, and then I was like, what is this? And my friend who's like not into tech at all, she's like, Martina, where have you been? I'm so embarrassed.
It's funny because it's like, I feel the same way about Telegram. I've been using Telegram since like 2015. Okay. It's like the only app, like my whole polycule, we all use it. I use SMS very rarely because of Telegram. And so now that everybody's suddenly discovering it, I'm like, y'all late. Like, y'all should have, I've been on this party for a minute.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So Arjay, you're also the founder of Playtime. Tell us about that.
Absolutely. So like I mentioned before, I built Playtime. It originally was built as an apparel brand for kinksters and sex workers. So the idea was, we see brand partnerships and merch being produced for Twitch streamers and YouTubers all the time, but sex workers are arguably even better business owners than these people. Most sex workers are their own videographer, they're their own photographer, they're their own accountant, they're their own customer service rep, they are their own social media marketer, they're everything all in one. And so the initial intention was to build an apparel brand and then do merch collaborations and brand partnerships with these creators. And so that's what we did. We set out, I built a Shopify store, did everything in print on demand, so that way I didn't have to take on a lot of inventory costs. We launched it initially with face masks because we actually launched in March 2020. Hell of a time to start a DTC brand, by the way.
Yeah. Face masks.
Yeah, so we launched with face masks. We ended up doing $6,000 in sales within the first 2 weeks, which was crazy.
Wow.
And so then we expanded. We started doing hoodies and then t-shirts, joggers. So now you can get a full outfit from Playtime, all the way down to your shoes. We even do high tops and slip-ons. And so with everything happening in the pandemic, it just got really, really difficult with supply chains. And so we really started to double down on community and media. And so that was why we launched our newsletter. We built a Discord server, which was kind of the catalyst for me building Homeroom. And then we started doing podcasting. So we now have 2 podcasts, over 200,000 downloads. One of which just passed 100 episodes in a whole year in production, which is crazy.
Wow.
So it's really exciting.
Congrats. Yeah, as I was doing research on you, I was looking at playtime stuff and I was like, man, I'm gonna have like really weird ads going forward. They're
Yeah.
like, oh, Martina's into this now? And then,
It's so funny. So to explain to anyone who ends up looking us up, where we initially got our start was in the ABDL and pup play community, which stands for Adult Baby Diaper Lover and Puppy Play. And so to anyone who's curious, yes, that sounds as crazy as it sounds. It is just as crazy as it sounds. But that community is awesome. As you can see from our clothing, it's super bright, super fun, a lot of primary colors. And it's primarily because this is a community of people who really get ignored by society in a lot of ways or misunderstood. And so it was really beautiful getting to create stuff for this space. And it was also very eye-opening because a very, very large part of the ABL community is on the autistic spectrum. And so I got a really deep education on autism and what that looks like and how it manifests itself, and also how kink and sex evolves for people who are on the spectrum, and then for people who have disabilities, for people who medically have to wear diapers, how that can eventually turn into a kink and a fetish, and what that looks like for them, and that not being demonized or treated as weird or strange. It's no different than the various things that I know people listening to this podcast are probably doing at home. So I'm very unashamed of the people that I serve and the communities that I work with, because at the end of the day, I don't feel like there's any shame to be had.
I love that so much. What a beautiful message.
What I try to do.
So RJ, Homeroom is the startup that's got funding. It's what you're fundraising for right now.
Correct.
And you talked a bit about how it got started, but like, how did you turn like that idea into an actual like website that people could start engaging with, or like an actual product?
One of the things that you'll hear a lot of people say in startups is do things that don't scale in the beginning. And they don't really explain what that means, and so I'm going to explain that really quick. It means doing the things that people are willing to pay for so they don't have to do. So initially what it was is, a lot of people don't realize this, but building a Discord server is actually very complicated because they don't really provide you with a lot of tools to speed up the process. So you build a server, now you need to build all the channels. You need to select what type of channels. Then once you do that, you need to build the roles and decide what permissions each roles should have. Then you need to add bots, so that way people can go through the process of onboarding. Then you need to fill it with content. You get where I'm going.
Yeah.
So what we did in the beginning was we literally did all of that. We would let people pay us, and we would build their Discord servers. We would do all of it. We did it all manually. And so what happened is the more we did it, the more commonalities we started to observe. And so as we continued doing it, we started to replicate these processes and then build operating procedures for the way that we built. And then we started using software to speed up the process. We eventually reached a point by earlier this year, we can build a full stack server with your channels, roles, categories, and permissions in minutes. Whereas most people, it takes them days, or hours, if not days. And so that's what we mean by do things that don't scale, is like do those things that no one's willing to do, and hopefully they're willing to pay you for. And so that's what we did in the beginning. And then since I'm a very, very adept no-coder, I actually prefer the term visual programming, and we'll get into what that means later, I'm sure. But I used a lot of no-code to build the actual software. And then now we have a whole software suite where you can build, manage, and scale your Discord server. We just launched the Varsity Club, which is a learning community which has education courses that teach the foundations of community and how that links to business. And all of that is able to be accessible from one single login. And the entire front end, as well as the SSO, has been done with no code. Didn't write a single line of code to do any of it. The back end is on AWS, but the front end is entirely no code.
Actually, let's jump ahead to that question because I'm so curious. Like,
yeah.
What does no code mean, and how did you make that happen?
So the way I actually prefer the term visual programming, this is something that we're trying to push forward. We are huge proponents of the concept of no code. And so to explain what this means for listeners who never heard of it before, when you think about traditional programming, it's a bunch of text on a screen, right? It's a bunch of text which then magically gets converted or compiled into binary code, which computers are able to process, and then it does whatever magic you've written. No code is doing the exact same thing, but with visual languages rather than text-based languages. So the best way to think of it is putting together a bunch of Lego bricks. And when you're done putting those bricks together, boom, now a piece of software. So literally that. And in fact, a lot of visual programming languages will look similar to blocks because that's essentially what you're doing. So a lot of the databases will just be Google Sheets or Airtable spreadsheets, or a platform called Xano, which is very similar but very much more complicated. And so basically your data sits in a spreadsheet, and then your front end is essentially manipulating the way that data is being displayed. And so what happens is that you're able to build full stack applications with the ability to log in, set your password, make payments, do subscriptions, all of it without ever having to write a single line of text-based code. You're just using visual languages to put it all together, which is really, really eye-opening and exciting for people who maybe have found programming very inaccessible.
That is really amazing because it makes, I was just going to say, like, it makes coding so accessible.
It really does.
Yeah, to the broader community.
And to take it a bit further, this is a topic I could talk for hours about, so I'm going to say this and then we can move on because I don't want to take up too much time. Homeroom is not just trying to fix the internet through content moderation. We want to build the next generation of developers. And no code is the way that we plan to do that. So our API is designed in a very unique way where it natively supports traditional programming and visual programming. We're about to release we're working internally on a new webhook standard, which would allow any existing API to be modified so it can support both visual programming and traditional programming. And once we're able to abstract away enough complexity, we can really unlock a lot of incredible things. So imagine, for example, a person who's dyslexic and can't process lines of text. Now suddenly they have visual tools that allow them to create programming languages. We're even looking at something that I know this sounds crazy, but we're looking at auditory programming, having different tones, which indicate different variable types. So individuals who maybe have visual impairments can now program based on sound alone. There's some really amazing things that could be done once you really abstract away a lot of the text that is required for programming and allow people to interact with code in ways that we've never even thought of before.
I can't wait for Homeroom to just like take over the world.
We're going to be the next
Who's Elon Musk?
Never heard of her. We're going to be I say this frequently, but we will be the next Google, period.
I love it. You come from a community building background and now you're a founder and the CEO of a tech company. So tell me about that transition.
I will say the thing that they do not talk about with this job is the change from being an employee to being an employer. It is dramatic, and the thing that was probably the most eye-opening to me is just how shitty startups are run. Especially in the current environment where a lot of people are getting laid off, I have heard so many horror stories of the way that people are being treated, the way they're being mistreated, rampant racism and sexism, and the various ways that these companies internally are basically just on fire. And what I came to realize, and the reason, is that HR is not something any startup typically looks at until after they've raised a Series B, meaning they've been in existence for 3, 4, 5 years before they ever hire their first HR rep. Imagine building a company to 40 employees without ever hiring an HR person. It's fucking disgusting. And so my very first hire was Bunny Das, a recruiter for Google. And I had gotten so much pushback from people about the fact that my first hire was an HR person. And it blows my mind because I said, I'm building a company. I am building a business. I do not know employment law. I do not know HR policies. I don't even know how to write an employee handbook. Why should I be the one responsible for these things? And even with software platforms like Gusto, JustWorks, and others, which take care of HR for you, quote unquote, you cannot pass off a sexual harassment issue to software. You cannot pass off how to deal with an employee who you fired who's trying to cause harm to the company. You can't pass off unemployment claims to software. You can't. These are human beings. So they need a human hand. It's mind-blowing to me. So that has probably been the most eye-opening in that transition, was realizing that part of the reason we see so many stories about Ubers, about Theranos, about WeWork, and all of these toxic spaces is because nobody cares about the human element when it comes to building product and building companies. At Homeroom, we have a philosophy of putting people before profit, because when you do that, you generate tons of profit. So that's probably been the most eye-opening part.
Oh my gosh, mind blown. It's totally true though, because I mean, I've worked at several companies that were early stage, and I think it was always too late to hire an HR person, or it took too long to then get the next person in, and there were a lot of things that sat lingering that also then ultimately led a lot of people to decide to leave because they weren't having their needs met.
They weren't having their needs met. We are a seed stage company which has an entire 40-page employee handbook. We have the first 30, 60, and 90 days for any new people who join our company planned out. We have an entire system for the way that we hire our employees versus our contractors. We have retention policies, a PTO policy, all of it. I have one of my employees, and I can share this because he's very open about it. Tim McDonald, our head of community, which I spoke about earlier. He's battling stage 4 liver cancer right now. Oh my gosh. And has been for a while, is in need of a liver transplant. Please go to timsliver.com if you would like to check it out.
I'll link that.
Please do. We're very optimistic. But Tim goes to chemo every other week. He lives in Florida, so he was there during the recent hurricane. And throughout all of it, he has said repeatedly, he says, RJ, this is the best place I've ever worked. I feel so supported. I feel like my needs are being met. This man has built a 6-module course that teaches the foundations of community and how it relates to business. He has managed to produce every piece of content that we've put out. He's writing blog articles every other day. All of that while battling cancer and working for us. And you know how? Because the company recognizes that he's a human being who maybe needs special accommodations here and there. So when he does need to show up, he shows the fuck up. Because he knows that we're going to fight just as hard for him as he fights for us.
Are you hiring?
Okay, so the amount of times that comment shows up in my TikTok is insane. Because I talk very openly about the way that I lead and my leadership style. And every TikTok where I talk about it, they're like, are y'all hiring? And I'm like, guys, you help us close our seed round and I'll hire all of you. How about that?
Okay, I love that. That's good to know. Yeah, so we'll keep an eye out for that close then.
Yes, it should hopefully come soon.
So as a CEO, I think something that, and you talked about this, is like you don't realize like you're responsible for the entire company. So I'm curious, is there like a role where you were like, oh shoot, I never had to think about doing this job before because now I'm the person that does everything. And you're like, this one is the one I love. I'm so glad I got to do this. Like it's a great new experience versus one where you're like, oh boy, I can't wait till we have the money to hire someone.
Yeah, I will tell you. So I will say the one that I was most excited about was when we really started to get heavy into the product. So like now we've built the software, the front end is out, the back end is handled by our head of engineering. This is the part I love. I love working on product. It's probably my favorite. And most founders will probably tell you that that's their favorite part of the job because it's literally magic. I mean, it's this idea that you had in your head that never existed. And in our case, we're building types of software and tools that quite literally never even been conceptualized. And so it's like, I don't know how else to describe it. This is probably minimizing it, but it's like your baby. It's like you've put something out into the world that never existed and you just want to see it be loved. And when people do love it and are willing to pay for it on top of that, it's like the best feeling in the world. However, the one part that I can't stand that I was super happy to offload is anything related to bookkeeping, billing, finances, all of that. As a person who comes from a very poverty mindset, as I mentioned, I spent the majority of my adult life in poverty. Finances in general stress me out. So doing that on a company-wide level was insane. The day that the check started to arrive for our pre-seed, I was paralyzed. I suddenly had $750,000 sitting in my bank account and was just told, all right, go build a company. And for someone who, until that year, had never made more than $45,000 a year, that was absolutely insane. Now I'm used to it, right? Like I'm an advisor to several startups. I've angel invested. I work with deals in this space. So I'm used to it. It's normalized now. But at the time, petrified. Absolutely petrified. So definitely got my EA to take care of a lot of our billing. So she handles all of our billing and all that kind of stuff now, and it works great.
I mean, that's great. That's a really smart move. Essentially just like recognizing, what's overwhelming for you, what's your weakness, and just making sure that someone handles it in a way that it just never becomes a problem.
Well, a lot of people don't realize that's actually the true job of a founder and a CEO, is to hire people to do the jobs that they are better at than you. Bunny is amazing at running, we call it human relations. So human relations, people, and culture, he's incredible at it. I would be horrible at it because I'm too disorganized in order to be able to do that kind of stuff. PJ, who's our ops manager and community architect, on it left and right. If I forget that a task needs to get done, don't worry, I didn't forget because PJ will remind me, right? It's like, it's all about hiring people who are better than you. And this is probably the hardest part that a lot of CEOs mess up, letting them do their job. CEOs make the mistake of micromanaging so often. It might not look the way you would have done it, but it probably doesn't because the way they did it is better. Mm-hmm. Right? So you have to take your ego out of it, which is very difficult for a lot of people to do.
All right, so you're gathering insights, you've built the product. I'm curious, like, as you're building it and as you're learning, and I also saw you did over like 150 customer interviews and you learned a lot of themes. Did you have to pivot at any point in time where you're like, oh, this is working or this really isn't working? And like, what did you do in those situations?
Yeah, so we had a major pivot this summer, and this is the one area where I am very open about admitting where I messed up. So originally we were a very service heavy company, and that was actually intentional. What we were trying to do was scale community management. So you would pay us a subscription, you get a community manager, you get a team of community moderators who would manage your community for you. And the reason we were doing that is because at the time, this is back before crypto was, falling off a cliff as it is right now. We had a lot of Web3, NFT, and crypto companies that were coming to us to help build their Discord servers because they are one of the biggest users of Discord from a business perspective. And so while I myself am very crypto contrarian, I think like 99.9% of it is bullshit. At the end of the day, like they had a need and we wanted to serve it. And so we had scaled, built this huge team of contractors. We had this whole system. We were kind of following in line of a company called Electric AI, which is essentially the same thing, but for IT. And so we were trying to build that model. Well, crypto crash happens. And all of our deal flow, all of our relationships, all of it just basically evaporated overnight. And it was also becoming difficult because a lot of VCs will not invest in service-heavy companies because they're a lot harder to scale. They have a much smaller margin. And so we ended up spending too much time on services. We should have pivoted it earlier. But in July, we pivoted hard into our software. We finished building, launched the software product in late August, and now we've seen incredible traction. And so that I'm very happy we made the pivot. I just wish we did it a little earlier.
I resonate with that a lot. I think there are many times when I look back and I'm like, oh, you saw the writing on the wall, but it was just like, for some reason, the decision wasn't made.
I feel actually kind of well, it's like a catch-22 because I'm also kind of happy that it happened because a lot of VCs will talk about how when you find product market fit that early, you probably haven't found product market fit, and we very much fell into that category. We thought we had nailed exactly what people wanted, which was community management as a service. What we ended up realizing was that's not what they wanted. They wanted an easier way to build their community so they can manage them themselves, which is why we pivoted into the software.
Yeah, that's a big learning. Yeah.
So we got that learning early though, so that's good.
Yeah. Yeah. If you hear random things, there's like I've got 2 dogs next to me.
Right.
And there's a fly going around that I like tried to kill before this, but I couldn't get it. And the little guy is just like trying to like jump at it. So he's just like, making all these little noises, jumping around.
You're totally fine. I have 3 cats, so if you hear meowing, that's why.
Okay, I love that. I'm actually a cat person, but then we got dogs, which obviously now I love dogs too. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about fundraising then. You raised a pre-seed. It was over $750,000, which is incredible. Tell me about it. Like, tell me, when did you decide, okay, it's time to fundraise, and what was your experience like?
Yeah, so what ended up happening was in late December, we were just getting so much demand. And at this point, I've been working for Lolita about I started in June, so this would have been 7 months. And she was actually kind of pushing and was like, RJ, like, you clearly want to build this business. Like, you really want to build this business. Like, go do it. And I was very resistant at the time because I was very intent on continuing working with her because I really enjoyed working with her. She's an incredible woman. But she was right. She was like, you need to go out and do this. And so what ended up happening, we ended up getting our lead investors completely by chance and by, like, accident. There was an investor I had DM'd. I won't name him here because I don't want to, like, expose our investors just yet. But I ended up emailing him or DMing him on Twitter at the recommendation of another founder. And I was only asking for product advice. Purely, that was all I was asking. He was an investor in multiple different community platforms and businesses early on, like Circle, Podia, and several others. And so he was like the guy in terms of an investing perspective for community. And I was like, hey, we built this thing. Would love your feedback. Like, this is what we're doing. And he's like, this looks really cool. Could we meet? And I was like, yeah, sure. Long story short, 3 meetings later, he was ready to commit $300,000 to us. Well, he originally wanted to do $600,000, but we decided to cut it in half, and then we got our other pre-seed, our other lead investor. We have co-leads for pre-seed, so they split it down the middle, $300K each, and then within 2 weeks, we were able to completely close the round, which was absolutely insane. So it was just completely by chance, and what I've come to realize is that One, obviously the fundraising environment was very different then. There was a lot of money flowing around and people were willing to throw it out. But also it's like one of those, a very strong lesson I tell founders all the time is shoot your shot. The worst that they can say is no. And the best that they can say is yes, right? And so it's like, you won't know unless you ask. And I think a lot of founders get in their head, they get nervous, they get scared at the fear of rejection. You are gonna get rejected way more than you get accepted. And if you let that fear stop you, you're never gonna go anywhere. But the thing to remember is that they will run out of founders before you run out of investors. So if you look at it from that perspective and recognize that founders are the one with all the leverage, you are the one with the idea. You are the one with the vision. You are the one with the potential to give them a big return. You hold the leverage. So when you put it from that perspective and you recognize that, it becomes a lot easier to fundraise, because if they say yes, cool. If they say no, all right, I'm moving on to the next one, because it's a loss for them, not a loss for you.
I hear that a lot where people are, it's like, how many no's did it take to get to a yes? And I think, obviously like rejection, I don't think as a society, we're really great at accepting rejection and like dealing with that in a healthy way. And so it's, I can imagine that that's definitely one of the reasons why founders, or why eventually perhaps even some companies fail, because they just weren't willing or able to put themselves out there.
One, especially in the case of BIPOC and women founders, I think especially could be difficult, right? Like if we look at the numbers, last quarter, a total of 43, I think I talked about this in my Twitter thread. Last quarter, a total of $43 billion in VC funding was deployed. Of that, 0.43% went to Black founders. Not even half of a percent. In fact, it's so low that if Homeroom closes our seed round, we close our seed round raise, it'll represent 1% of all the funding that went to Black founders last quarter. One person, me, would have 1% of all the funding for Black founders. That is insane. Mm-hmm. We are a country of 330 million people. That should not be possible, right?
It makes me so sick. I mean, that's the whole reason why, I started this whole thing, because when I've been on the other side of the table, part of fundraising rounds, and I just always see the people looking back at me, and I'm just like, really?
Yeah.
It's, and like I think about like, the problems that founders are solving, and I'm like, how can you relate to these problems if you live in that 1% bubble?
Seeing the amount of women or femtech startups that are founded by an entire team of white men is mind-blowing to me. It's mind-blowing because it's like, it's not to say that they can't. That's not at all what we're saying. What we're saying is that it's insulting to only fund the people who've never dealt with the issue. That they're the only people getting that funding. And it's insane. And when you bring it up and you point it out, people go, oh yeah, that sucks. But then nothing changes. The amount of VCs that I've pitched and then looked at their portfolio and seen that there is not a single person of color or woman in their entire portfolio. And we're talking 400, 500 plus companies. Every single one is founded by a white man. It's like, you mean to tell me out of all the deal flow, all of it, you don't have one woman? Like, leaving the person of color thing off the table, like one, it's crazy. And it's a cycle, because these are the people who also are the LPs in other funds. So it's like the people who are deploying the funds for the fund managers to go out and deploy also have all the biases. So it's a systematic issue. And so that's part of the reason I think a lot of founders who look like myself or you end up just giving up. It's because the bar that we have to reach is so high. And then you see the stories of people like SBF from FTX, who is playing League of Legends while pitching Sequoia. And then they're talking about how impressive that is. Are you kidding me? Are you actually kidding me? And so right. I understand why a lot of founders give up. It's hard. It's really hard. I refuse to. I'll be 6 feet under the ground before I give up. But not everyone has that tenacity. But not everybody has that tenacity. Not everybody does. So
you can see it two ways. One way, you can see it super discouraging, or on the other hand, you can see it as an opportunity for change, right? And like, I think both of us are seeing that as like a, let's get our elbows in there and just start breaking down those barriers.
It's the same way I look at the reasons why I don't get angry at people getting into crypto. While I might be a contrarian to it, I do think that you can't bury your head in the sand. It's here, right? Like, it's here. Like, as much as we can argue that it's fake money, arguably the stock market and the US dollar is also fake. But we believe in it, and the faith that we give in it. Exactly. It's like the faith that we give in it is why it has value. And crypto is no different. A shit ton of people believe in it, so now it has value. And so we can either bury our heads in the sand and allow the exact same situation that happened to our current financial system to happen all over again in crypto, and yet again us end up in a space of inequality, Or we can allow those individuals who are trying to make inroads and making the crypto space more equitable and more accessible to everyone, we can encourage it. And that's the position I take, is I try to assume positive intent wherever possible. If someone's going out there and they're saying we want to make crypto more accessible for Latinos, like Web3 Familia, or Guap Coin, which is trying to make it more accessible, Bitcoin more accessible for the Black community, I say go for it, because it's here, it exists. Somebody has got to be fighting for us in those spaces. It might not be me, but that's why we have to pick and choose our battles, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, where are you going to spend your energy on?
Exactly.
You were a community manager for Lolita, and I'm curious also, like, how did that experience impact your ability to fundraise?
I will be honest, that woman is the reason I have a career. it's a sheer fact. And I very much appreciate just how willing she was to fight for us, and still does. I mean, in our current fundraise, she has introed us to tons of different investors. Her startup investor matching tool, which is on her website, is incredible. We've gotten tons of introductions through there. When we were initially fundraising, she even let me use her halo of influence in order to signal that I was working for her, which is a lot. That is a really big gift to someone who is complete outsider to tech. And so for that reason, let's just say that she has a significant stake in Homeroom. I'll put it that way. And that was my choice, and it's a choice I don't regret, and I never will regret.
It's incredible. I think a lot of people have helped me get to where I am, right? And I think that's also why I'm always thinking about how do I pay it forward? How do I make sure that when someone reaches out and asks for help, I'm always available? And I'm sure you feel similar when it comes to Lolita and that environment as well.
It's very much that. And the way I looked at it, we had people that were like, oh, I'm worried that she's taking advantage of you and all these other things. I'm like, one, I'm not an idiot, so don't assume that I don't know what I'm doing. But second, I think the other part is that look at how many opportunities were given out of nepotism or what have you to individuals who don't deserve it, right? The amount of individuals who get early access to an investment opportunity before anyone else has even heard of it existing. All of that stuff comes from people with privilege and ability giving it to the people who either help them or to people that are part of their club. I see no reason why I shouldn't be able to do the same. I've given advisory shares to people who've helped us, like the person who designed our logo. I gave him a little bit of equity in Homeroom for doing so. I've done the same for the video editor I'm working for on TikTok. Part of the reason being is that that's a huge growth vehicle for Homeroom. So if you are helping us build the company, you should be able to see a little bit of benefit and upside if we become successful. That's the way I look at this. I could end up with 2% of Homeroom, and I wouldn't care, because I'm not in this for the money. I'm in this to make the internet better and safer and more inclusive. That's what I care about. The money will come with it, I'm sure, but at the end of the day, I would still be doing the same thing even if I wasn't making money from it. So any opportunity I have to spread the wealth, so to speak, I'm going to do that.
I admire you so much, Arjay. Thank you so much for sharing.
Oh, thank you. That's so kind of you.
So wrapping up the fundraising part then, what do you wish you had known going into fundraising? And what are you applying now that you're doing your seed round?
There's two things that I wish I had known. One, I wish I had known how much of a game it is. VC is very much, I hate to put it this way, but it really is a game. You need to know the right people. Most VCs will only take an intro if it's more, meaning that you've been introed for someone else. And I looked at it as, wow, I have this great product and all this great stuff. Why wouldn't anyone invest in me? But I was being ignorant to this. I'm Black. So there's that aspect. I was being a little ignorant there. But the other side of it, too, is that investors are not the visionaries founders are. You can't expect them to understand what you're thinking or what you're talking about or what you're trying to do. You have to literally sell and lay it out for them. And that's something I really apply to our current fundraise. I have a whole system. It's very sales oriented of how I approach it. My EA, because she has access to my calendar and everything, prior to every meeting with an investor, she posts an entire thread with their name, their LinkedIn, previous investments they've made, their history, their education history, their previous employment history. So I go into every meeting with an investor with an entire write-up of who they are right next to them on my other monitor. As we're looking and sourcing firms, I look at who they've invested in, what's the team makeup, what's the diversity look like, and if I don't see a single person of color or woman on their investment team, I don't even bother pitching them, because they don't care. Because if they did, there would be some diversity in the investment team. So I've really changed the way I approach it. And the other thing I learned is it is about volume. As I think I said earlier, that they will run out of founders before you run out of investors. It's very true. part of the reason why VC is so broken is because they only invest in the same people over and over. White men from Harvard, Stanford, or MIT. So because of that, their pool of where their deal flow comes from is actually really small. And a lot of it's bullshit, which is why 90% of startups fail. That's not a good track record. VCs are not good at their job. Pure fact, they're not good at their job. So when you look at it from that perspective and you realize it's a game of volume and you just need to put yourself out there as much as possible, it becomes a little bit easier. So while I fundraise, it's difficult right now because the fundraising environment is really, really tough. We've had connections and I'm taking investor calls almost twice a day at this point. So it's just a matter of time. And so when you look at it from that perspective, it becomes a lot easier to handle the rejection because you're like, it'll happen. It's not gonna,
It will happen. Sending you fundraising vibes.
Thank you.
The most favorable terms that you want.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So we're going to go to the next section, which is called Never Again. Which I used to do with my product team back in the day, where we kind of just talked about the things that we failed at, because I think we're not necessarily honest about it all the time, or we don't want to think about it because it was perhaps a painful situation, but I think there's always like a learning that comes out of that. So I'm curious from your perspective, like, what is something that you will never again do?
That's such a good question. And I love that because I don't think we're vulnerable enough to talk about our failures publicly enough. There's two. I think one is waiting to fire someone when I've been told they need to be fired. There was an employee we should have let go of, and I didn't because they were someone I cared about. I really wanted to believe in them. I had multiple employees tell me that I should have let them go before we did, and we eventually did, but we could have saved a lot of time, money, and a lot of strain if I had just done that earlier. So I very much am now of a mindset of, if it's not the right fit, it's not the right fit. Let them go and let them find other opportunities and let the company also move on. So that's one part. The other, I think, is I will never take an investment check from someone blindly again. There were some individuals that we took investments from in the past that have proven to not have panned out in the way that I expected, and in one particular case, I feel very manipulated. And so that was a really, really hard lesson. It was very difficult, it was very painful, but again, I learned it early. And so that's definitely a mistake I won't be making again.
Those are really good. Thank you for sharing.
Of course, absolutely.
We're wrapping up slowly. I'm curious, what's some advice you would give someone who's starting as a founder?
What would I give? One, learn no code. Honestly, that's probably a number one. I know I sound like I'm just like promoting my own stuff, but like, it is so powerful. We built our entire front end in literally a month. That's unheard of in technology. I've advised several startups at this point, and almost all of them are using no code to build their products or their MVPs. And there's a lot of companies that were built on no code. A lot of people don't realize this, but Brex, like the big fintech company, their initial version was on Retool, a no code tool, for like a while. And so it's very powerful. So that would be number one. Number two would be to please be 100% sure that you want to be venture backed before you decide to go venture. It is hard. It is the hardest job I've ever had. It's the hardest job in my opinion, is one of the hardest jobs on earth, in my opinion. And I know that's a very tall thing to say, but I truly believe it. The expectations that are set for you are incredibly high. You need to be willing to work so hard, harder than most other people around you. You also are going to have to get used to the fact that very few people around you are going to be able to relate to you anymore. It's very hard to talk about your job when you're dealing with millions of dollars, and most people will never see that in their entire lifetime. And the other side is growth. It is about growth. If you're going to build a venture-backed startup, you need to be confident that it's going to turn into a billion-dollar company. If you're looking to make a few million and just live comfortably, VC is not the way to go. Don't do it. Do not make that mistake because it will kill your company. So that's probably even bigger than what I said the first time. Be 100% sure and do your research on if you want to be venture backed, if you're going to pursue that as a path for your company.
Is that what you would also recommend, or like, is that the advice you'd also give people that are fundraising?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So now we're going to rapid round, and I told you I was very excited about this. So,
you did. I'm like excited now because you were like so excited about it. So let's do it.
Okay, so I just start with a softball. So I know, or at least at this moment in time when I looked you up, you lived in the East Bay, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes,
Okay.
I actually just relocated to the city proper, so that was part of the craziness. We moved 2 weeks ago, so yeah.
Okay, got it. Well, that was going to be my question: is North Bay or South Bay?
Oh, you try to start fights. Okay.
Yeah.
North Bay. I
Yeah.
South Bay is cute, but North Bay has a city proper. You got Muir Woods. Obviously you have Emeryville, which I'm a huge fan. That was where I lived, so I'm a huge fan of. South Bay is cute, but San Jose has like hardly any like true culture in my opinion. I think it's a very like kind of like concrete jungle. So North Bay all the way.
Okay. Okay. So I know you used to be a makeup artist for MAC, and there are a lot of celebrity brands out there now.
Yes.
So I'm curious, Fenty Beauty by Rihanna or Kylie Cosmetics by Kylie Jenner?
You already know what the answer going to be. This Fenty. Kylie. No, I could never. Those lips be cute though, but I no.
Okay. Last one, pre-seed or sesame seed?
I love you. Now a sesame seed. It's tasty and it can keep me fed.
Okay, great. So, for anyone that's starting out as a founder or fundraising, any recommendations for things to read, to listen to?
Absolutely. So there's a couple things. Lolita actually has she writes Medium articles. So if you search Lolita Taub Medium, you'll be able to see she has tons of really amazing articles. In particular, there's one that she wrote specifically about the various different types of fundraising options that are available to founders. I recommend that one. I send this one to literally every founder I advise. There's another one where she has written how to request an intro, and I use that template all the time. It's a very powerful tool. Highly recommend it. If you are someone who's really like just curious about business and really loves to read and like you like reading a lot, highly recommend The Generalist. It's a newsletter written by Mario Gabriel. He writes around Web3, finance, startups, and business. His newsletters are like novels, basically, and so definitely something to read on a Sunday morning, not on your way to work. But highly recommend him. And then I would say another would just actually be just following a few people on Twitter. A lot of people don't realize this, but like VC startups live on Twitter. That's like the platform, that and LinkedIn. So I definitely would check out Elizabeth Bien. She's Drunk Hippo 33 on Twitter. Mac Conwell is another one to look at. Arlen Hamilton, and this one I'm blanking on right now. I can never remember his last name, but if you just search Lenny's newsletter, it's the #1 business Substack newsletter right now. His stuff is amazing. He has his own podcast, he has his newsletter, he does for various events. Really, really, really amazing content for founders and for anyone who's just interested in business at all.
Cool. I will definitely link all of those in the description as well. So thank you so much for sharing. So RJ, we're wrapping up. What do you have to share with the world? What do you have going on? Where can people find you?
Yeah, so Twitter is kind of going down the toilet right now, but if you want to, you can check me out on Twitter. I'm pretty vocal about my experiences. I talk a lot about what it's like working in startups as a black and queer and non-binary founder. So it's just Life with RJ, ARJAY. That's pretty much my handle everywhere. If you search it on Instagram, TikTok, whatever, you can find it. TikTok is where I get a bit more spicy. I'm a little bit more free in my thoughts. It's very interesting being an extreme socialist who also happens to be working in the most capitalistic area of industry possible. So if any of what I just mentioned interests you, definitely check out my TikTok. And then I would say the final place would be just check out Homeroom. Just kind of learn more about what we do and our mission. We actually have a community that's meant for individuals who are community-minded. We call it a community for community-minded people. It's called the Varsity Club. So if you're interested in learning more about community and how it pertains to either your business, your organization, maybe you have a local group, definitely check it out. It's just Homeroom.club/varsity. It is subscription based, but the lowest tier is $3 a month. So really, really affordable, and that's intentional. We want to provide access to this kind of information as much as possible. So yeah, check those out.
Great. That's amazing. Thank you so much, RJ. That wraps up our interview. Thank you so much. I learned so much, and I can't wait to rewatch and just absorb more, because I'm sure there's so many nuggets that I missed.
Oh no, thank you. This has truly been such a fun interview. I love doing podcasts in general, but you're so much fun to talk to. This has just been so enjoyable, and so if you ever would like to have me back, I would be more than happy to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much. RJ is such a boss. I had such a great time interviewing him, and I'm so glad we're able to share his journey here. If you're curious about how to get started as an angel investor, check out this video right here where I talk about what an accredited versus non-accredited investor is and 3 easy ways to get started right away.